It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millzy. Back at the hometown commander. We are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I take a deck, I brew it for you. This is my version 1.0 list. No testing, just my thoughts down on paper on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. And if I am your favorite Magic channel, I will somehow out-brew myself. This week's been a whirlwind for me in a lot of ways. If you haven't seen any of the earlier videos this week, my wife and I gave birth to our first kiddo last week, baby girl, and we are very excited and doing my best to get this content out for you as quickly as I can so I can get ahead and not only enjoy the channel, but also enjoy the life happening outside of it. This is a deck that I had kind of sitting around. This is a deck I brewed back when Baldur's Gate came out. It was a deck that I was half interested in. It was Dimir. It was kind of milly. It was kind of tribal. I thought, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that's a thing that I'll enjoy. And I was wrong. The deck wasn't really something I was interested in. But I've been keeping around in this folder of old deck lists to eventually spruce back up to reapproach at some point. And I thought, why not do this for Millzy Brews? Completely reapproach the deck, completely redesign it, and put it out there. We have got a couple new horrors lately, but mainly I just think that Dimir decks are just kind of interesting. They're interesting decks. You know, most people, when they think of Dimir, think of Yuriko or things like that. But I thought, man, this deck was a ton of fun to play the couple times I played it, and so why not reapproach it? And that's Captain Nagathrod. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but that's my shot at it. 3 blue, black, 3/6. Horrors you control have menace, which is great. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. In the beginning of your end step, choose target artifact or creature card in an opponent's graveyard that was put there from their library this turn. Put it onto the battlefield under your control. So we automatically give menace to our horrors. Our horrors have this mind crank effect where whenever they deal combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. In the beginning of our end step, we get to take something from an opponent's graveyard. So this is kind of fun because if you think about it, we're doing a lot of really interesting things here. We get to play this tribe. We get to mill our opponents, but we get a good reason to mill our opponents. So let's just talk about what I'm thinking for the deck, what I'm hoping we can accomplish, and that kind of thing. Land base, try to keep it pretty standard. We want to get all of our colors out and be able to use them effectively. Urza because we do have a couple things. We get to use like Cavernous Souls because all of our creatures are horrors in the deck, I believe. So that should allow us to do that. Nephalia Drynard seems kind of interesting, milling our opponents out. Path of Ancestry seems really good here because we're playing almost all horrors. Secluded Courtyard, again, you could play the Unclaimed Territory as well, but I'm not, because again, you don't want to play too many of these at a mana of color only for the chosen creature type, because at the end of the day, we have lots of the spells that we're trying to cast as well. We don't want to completely pigeonhole ourselves into just those lands, although they're really good. Okay, enchantments. So again, horror tribal, mill, right? Because when we deal damage, we're milling. So we might as well lean into the milling as best we can. Enemy dead, going to get something out of anyone's graveyard, put it under our control, but it's -1/-0. Court of Cunning says the beginning enters the battlefield, we become the monarch. Beginning of our upkeep, any number of target players each mill 2 cards. If you're the monarch, each of those players mill 10 cards instead. So, two cards a player already, so that gives us decent targets for the captain at the end of the turn. But if we're the monarch, then it's 30 cards total, right? 10 for each of our opponents, and that gives us even better targets. I don't think it's going to be very hard to stay the monarch unless we're playing against a lot of flying decks. Then we don't have a ton of flyers to deal with that. But I think the difference is we're going to be milling our opponents, kind of slowly, kind of strangling them a little bit on their resources. So that's the hope, is that we can do it that way. All right, Endless Evil. This is a card that came in the pre-con. Beginning your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of the enchanted creature, except it's a 1/1. Whenever the enchanted creature dies, if that creature was a horror, return it to the Endless Evil to our hand. There's a lot of great horrors in our deck that we can copy that have great effects, and making just another one at the start of each turn that's a 1/1 is great. It leaves a blocker back, does a lot of really cool things. Haunted one of my favorite cards that this deck introduced, because it not only is great in this deck, but it's great in a lot of black-based tribal decks. It says commander creatures you own have. So if the captain's out, we get this effect. If the captain's not out, when Haunted one's out, we don't get the effect. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, it and other creatures you control that share creature type with it each get +2/+all and have Undying. So Undying says if that creature would die, return from the graveyard back to the battlefield. under your control. So that's great because now all of our horrors, even if they get blocked up and get killed in combat, are going to come back. And Haunted One is, like I said, it's being used in a lot of other decks, especially black-based tribal decks, because you basically just, especially like zombie, I've seen a lot of zombie decks play Haunted One because you just get them back. And this is very helpful when we need to kind of attack, right? We kind of want to with the horrors. That's how we're going to mill our opponents out. So very useful. Ley line and letting us play things as though they have flash. Psychic Corrosion, whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is great because on all our future turns, we're going to just start milling our opponent at the start of our turns. That gives us more things right at the end step to have access to. Reflections of Lojara. When it comes in, we pick a creature type. Obviously going to be horror. Whenever we cast a spell of the chosen type, we copy that spell. So we do have a couple of horrors that are legendary. So unfortunately, this is going to kind of get in the way of that. But most of them aren't. So this is going to end up giving us a lot of good value. And then Ristic Study to draw. All right. Artifacts. Arcade Signet. Chromatic Lantern. Not as useful because we're only in 2 colors. But it's just here as a way to get... to make all of our lands tap for anything, and then give us another piece of ramp. Dimir Signet, the Crypt, Soul Ring, and the Talisman. Everflowing Chalice is a combo with, I believe, it's Hullbreaker Horror and something else, and Soul Ring, the Chalice. So there's some combos there. It's a combo I've never really made much sense of, made it work, but it is there if that's a option you have or you want to kind of look down the road of. Herald's Horn, going to make all of our horrors cheaper. Liftform Engine is here to copy that ability, and Resonator are here to copy that Captain ability at the end of turn to get us more things. I just like Liftform Engine because it just copies other things as well. But Strionic, Resonator, and Liftform Engine are here to copy the Captain's ability at the end of the turn to get us more out of our opponent's graveyards, 2 or 3 things as opposed to just 1. And that's well worth the 2 mana depending on what our opponent's mill. But Maxwood Nexus is going to turn every creature we control and we own that are on the battlefield into horrors, and then we can make a horror token. This is just going to, the main reason Maxwood Nexus I think works well in this deck is if you steal something from your opponents, it becomes a horror on your side of the battlefield, and then you get the benefit of it when it attacks. I think I think you're willing to use your opponent's creatures anyway, right? I don't think you lose anything by doing that. But I think the good thing about Maxwood Nexus is it basically just, it turns on the Undying from Haunted One. It turns on any of your other tribal synergies at all whatsoever. But it also just makes sure that we're milling cards when they deal damage. Mind Crank, another kind of a version of one of those effects that the Captain has whenever an opponent loses life. That player mills that many cards. So with the Captain and this out, they're milling twice the amount of damage that we do. Which is great. I mean, that's what we want to do, right? We want to help kind of push our opponents down, get more things into their graveyard, and then hopefully we can steal them. The bad part about the Captain's ability, and the reason why I think Mind Crank becomes so good, is remember it says something that was put there this turn. So we can't just mill this turn and then get it out of their graveyard next turn. We really want to mill as much as we can this turn so that we can take all those things this turn, right, and use them for that. So I think that's the big reason why Mind Crank is so good, is because it's kind of just making sure that we get access to the most things we can this turn. Instance, Brainstorm for a bit of draw. Psych Rift just going to help push our opponents back if possible. Dark Ritual is going to help us get out the Captain quicker if need be, or it's just going to help us enable some more things. Deadly Rollick for removal. Drawn on the lot can be a counterspell or removal depending on the situation we needed it and how many cards are our opponent's graveyard. Fierce Guardianship for a little bit of protection. Mystical Tutor can go get a lot of different things. There's a lot of cards in the deck that we really like, and we'll talk about some of them the sorceries in a second. Rapid Hybrid for a little bit of removal. Reality Shift for a little bit of removal, and the Vamp Tutor to go get the things we need. Okay. Sorceries, where we get into a lot of these really fun cards. We'll talk really quick. Damnation, Death the D Tutor. We got Feed the Swarm because so much of removal is creature based. It's not bad to throw in an extra enchantment-based removal here, and then Ponder to draw some cards. Okay, Fractured Sanity says each opponent mills 14 cards for 3 blue. With the Captain out, this is going to give us a really good look at getting things from each of our opponents. And we do have a couple things in the deck that double, that we do have some ways to double the amount milled or things like that. So Fractured Sanity is great because it's just going to start nuking our opponent's libraries. Maddening Cacophony. Each opponent mills 8 cards if it was kicked. Instead, each opponent mills half their library rounded up. This paired with, we are playing Brewvac exactly for this reason, so that It plus Maddening Cacophony will brew our opponent's entire libraries, and basically then all we'll have to do is end our turn, and the game will be done. No one will be able to draw a card, and the game will be over. Mind Grind is such an interesting card because it, with enough mana into this Mind Grind, you're probably going to end up hurting a lot more opponents than you think. It says each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal X land cards and puts all card revealed this way into our graveyard. X can't be 0. So all you need to do is put 6 or 7 into this, and you might hurt more decks than you realize. Yes, the land folly green decks probably you won't nuke a ton of cards from, but hopefully you get a good creature in the process that you can get back with the captain. But the best part here is the control decks that aren't playing as many lands. I mean, you might hurt them. I mean, consider the scenario where you put 8 or 9 into Mind Grind. You may take a third of someone's library in the process. So, I mean, Mind Grind is one of those cards. It's a great finisher if you ever have enough mana. But I think it's also just one of those cards that is going to sneakily hurt our opponents. The same thing is the same similar type effect, although it doesn't mill, it goes to exile, is Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled total mana value 20 or more. Again, to those big stompy green decks or Gruul decks, or those dragon decks, we're not going to hit that many cards. But for the control decks or the elf decks or things like that, you're going to nuke a ton of cards with Tasha's, and hopefully you just hurt them in the process. Tasha's also pairs with a card like Umbris from the Crimson Vow Commander. Whenever it gets +1 for each card your opponent own in exile, and whenever it and another horror enters the battlefield under your control, target opponent exiles the cards from the top of the library until they exile a land card. So Umbris is milling to exile instead of just milling to the graveyard. And Tasha's kind of helps with that, but I think it's just another way to kind of hurt your opponents and have them kind of lose that bonus. And then just the Time Warp, just in case we ever hit the point where taking that extra turn really benefits us. Okay, every creature in the deck is a horror, with the exception of Spark Double, Sakashima, and Bruvak. Of course, Sakashima and Spark Double are going to come in and Phoenix, of course, because Phoenix is going to double it's going to allow us to mill our opponents more. But anyway, everything else is a horror because, again, we want to keep that tribal synergy. Aboleth Spawn. Whenever a creature on the battlefield under opponent's control causes a triggered ability of that creature to trigger, you may copy that ability. So this is great for things that are coming in, ramping or things like that. Brainstealer Dragon, at the beginning of your end step, exile the top card of each opponent's library. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. If you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana of those or any mana of any color to cast it. This is great because whether or not Brainstealer Dragon's out or not, we can still cast those things. And then whenever a non-land permanent opponent owns enters the battlefield under your control, they lose life equal to its mana value. This is really great with the captain because when we take something with the captain and put it on our battlefield with Brainstealer out, they're still going to lose life. So that's I think why Brainstealer works really well with this. Bruvak, again, if an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. Works great, even though it's not a horror, because it's just going to double all this fun we're having. Consuming Aberration. It's power and temperature to go to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards, all of them. So this is going to get pretty big. Whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards on top of the library until they reveal a land card, then puts those cards in their graveyard. So again, just trying to mill our opponent out, constantly be taxing them cards for all the things we're doing. Drivnod. Carnage Dominus. I don't think we don't really have that many dying triggers. It's just an 8/3 for 5 mana that if it doesn't get blocked or we can put it in the right scenario is going to mill our opponent for 8 cards. I just think it's worth it, well worth the 5 mana. And then all we have to do is just make it indestructible. And then what are you going to do? Since if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control a trigger, that ability triggers additional time. So again, it's just a big 8/3. We could make it indestructible. And I think it becomes pretty good. Eater of the Dead. 0, take 1 creature card from any graveyard and move it. So exile a creature from any graveyard and untap it. This is really good with Phoenix because if your opponents have enough creature cards in their graveyards, you can actually mill everybody out with this. So you would tap Eater of the Dead with Phoenix to mill someone for the 3 cards. You could, if they have a creature card in their graveyard, you untap Eater of the Dead, and then you keep going. This is one of those things that's going to help just with everything else. This is just one thing there that's going to help us do that. Grizzleaz, Illithid Scholar. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. This could protect some of our creatures if we get them into bad blocking scenarios. Whenever one of our creatures you control do a combat damage player draw a card, this is going to help refill our hands, but I like the top clause because it can kind of help protect some of our creatures. Or for creatures like Sagoshima or Spark Doubler for other creatures that have great abilities. They can bounce it back to our hand, and we can play them down again and use those abilities again. So I kind of like that. Guilt Feeder, Fear, so it can't be blocked except by artifact or black creatures. Whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, defending player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. This is something that could definitely hurt our opponents, depending on how much we're milling them. And Guilt Feeder could actually take somebody out. So I like that. I like that there's these looming threats of hurting our opponents. Hullbreaker Horror can't be counted. Whenever we cast a spell, we either return a spell we don't control to its owner's hand or return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It's going to bounce things out of the way, and I really like that. It could potentially scare some blockers. If our opponent tries to counter something, we could respond with a cheap instant and bounce it back to our opponents. Bounce the counter spell back to our opponent's hands. If they try to remove something, we could just bounce it back to our hand instead of trying to lose that permanent. I think Hullbreaker Horror is very interesting, and it's a 7/8 body, which is going to be hard to deal with. Illithid Harvester is an adventure card. The Plant Tadpole's Adventure says tap X creatures they don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. This can definitely block down some blockers for us to get through some of our horrors. And then this is when it enters the battlefield, turn any number of target tap non-token creatures face down. They're 2/2 horror creatures. This is great because we can tap important creatures down, then we can flip them over, and then they're not really usable, right? Then they're creatures without abilities. Mind Flayers, whenever it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature for as long as you control Mind Flayer. The goal here is just to take something our opponent has that we don't want them to have and take it for ourselves, use it for ourselves. This is what the captain's trying to do anyway. Nemesis of Reason, whenever it attacks, defending player mills 10 cards. I think it's well worth the 5 mana, especially if we can do it more than once. This is definitely going to hurt our opponent's Night Howler. An enchanted creature get +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. So we can either use it like an aura on a creature for 4 mana, or play it on its own for 3 mana. And it becomes pretty big depending on how many creatures in their graveyards. Phoenix, again, creatures you control have tap. Target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is this creature's toughness. So any of our creatures can tap for milling our opponents. Phyrexian Obliterator just got that pretty new printing in Phyrexia LB1, which is one of the reasons why I'd kind of thought about this deck. Whenever source deals damage to it, that player sacrifices that many permanents. So it's quad black mana. It's a 5/5 with trample, but it's just going to help tax our opponents. Ravenous Chupacabra, it's a horror. Whenever it comes in, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Just helpful. And then it's a little 2/2 body that can block. Sagoshima can come in and copy anything, and the legend rule does not exist for us anymore as long as it's out. Sewer Nemesis, choose a player when it comes in. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in that player's graveyard. And then whenever that player casts a spell, they mill a card. Sewer Nemesis is great because it can kind of pick a player, and hopefully we can start hurting them a little bit, or we pick the player we're most actively going after, or we can kind of spread our targets out to kind of mill all our opponents out and hurt them that way. Sludge Monster, whenever it enters battle for attacks, put a slime counter on up to 1 target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have power. Toughness 2/2. This is great because it's going to start kind of tapping down our opponent's creatures, getting rid of those menacing abilities that we don't want and that we don't want to deal with. Spark Double, very similar to Sakushima, except it comes in as a non-legendary copy of whatever we pick. Thing in the Ice is a pretty fun card because in a lot of the ways it's just going to disrupt our opponents. It comes in with 4 ice counters. Whenever we cast it into a sorcery, we remove a counter from it. And then if it has no counters on it, we transform it. And this is whenever it transforms, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. This could hurt us, right? Because in some ways, if we've been stealing things from our opponents and then we flip this, all those things we stole are going to go back to their owner's hands. But hopefully we can see that Maskwood Nexus to protect those things. Toxrill, one of my favorite horrors in the deck, just going to start hurting our opponents. And the cool part is that the slime counters work with Sludge Monster as well. They're both slime counters, so they kind of work hand in hand in a lot of ways. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. At the end of every turn, we put a slime counter on each creature we don't control. And then when those creatures we don't control with slime counter on them die, we get 1/1 slugs, or we could sack the slugs, draw cards. Toxrill is just an absolute unit on its own, and it just gets even better in this deck when we're just trying to get things out of the way for our horrors. Uchulan? Ukulan? I don't really know how to say it, but this card's honestly pretty interesting. Its power is equal to the number of crabs, oozes, or horrors you control. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target creature card from opponent's graveyard. If you do, you make another one. So that's great because we're already going to have the horrors. Anyway, we're milling our opponents. We're probably going to have plenty of creature cards in their graveyard. Mill one at our end step, get another Ukulon. We could actually double this with Stronic Resonator or Lithoform if we needed to as well. Build up a board of these Ukulons to get good abilities. We talk about Umbrus, and then Zelix, who's actually become a pretty popular commander to pair with that Haunted 1 background. Zelix Sandy Flare, 2/3 for 3. Whenever a player mills one of our creature cards, you create a 1/1 black horror creature token. So this is great because just having this out, milling with other abilities, we might pick up some of these 1/1 horrors. And then one tap, target player mills 3 cards. And then just one Planeswalker. I had come back and forth on which of the couple of these Jaces to use because they're all pretty good when it comes to milling. I think I like this one the best, though. It can come down for 3 mana if we need it to, although it only comes down with 3 loyalty if we do. We can immediately +1 to give a creature -3/-0 until the next turn. We can -2 to mill 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 more cards in it, we draw 3 cards. Otherwise, we just draw a card. We really wanted to come down with 4. We really wanted to pay 4 for this to come down and be able to -2 twice. But if we only can -1 once, then that's not bad either. And then it's -X. Target player mills 3 times X cards. If it comes down with 3 loyalty, we can mill someone for 9. Comes down with 5 loyalty, we can mill someone for 15. So I think Jace is just kind of interesting. With Brewvac, you have a chance of milling someone out for a lot. But again, I like that it can come down for 3 or 4. I just think it has a little bit more versatility than the other Jaces that we have access to that mill. What do you guys think? Dimir Horrors, let me know down in the comments. Again, a deck that I find kind of interesting. I'd love to give this one another shot at some point. I really like some of just the fun of this deck and just some of the ways the deck works. I'd love to play around with this eventually because I think the deck's kind of fun. And I love the idea of this steal your opponent's things and have fun with it. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and I will catch you next time.